Challenges at school may seem harder to tackle if you feel like you're struggling alone. In this programme, two teachers share their workload issues with a panel of experts.
I work with a lot of other women who work part-time, and I think they'd all agree that they work more than half a week.
Through their stories, you too can gain ideas on how to better manage your workload.
There is nothing that says you can't have PPA at home. It is up to the discretion of the management of the school.
On the panel are Julian Stanley, Chief Executive of the Teacher Support Network, Robert Latham, a Senior Counsellor working for Teacherline, and Nina Franklin, Representative for the National Union of Teachers in Bristol. Nicola is a primary school teacher. As a single parent, she decided to go part-time to manage life with her child. However, she feels that she still works more than her half timetable. She wants to reduce the work she does out of school.
Welcome, Nicola. Do you want to tell us more about your situation and workload?
Yes, of course. I worked full-time as a primary school teacher for 5 years, and then when I had my daughter, I quickly realised that to live like that with a child would be impossible. So now I work 2.5 days, which suits me. But in terms of the paperwork and the work that I do at home, I probably still do almost as much work as I used to. I think as a teacher, it's always in the back of your mind what you're doing the next week and what you might need for your lessons.
Because some people argue when they go part-time that it can be the worst of all worlds because they're still working more hours as you've described.
Do your colleagues have the same sort of problems?
Yeah, I do work with a lot of other women who work part-time, and I think they'd all agree that they work more than half a week.
Union representative Nina Franklin wants to know why part-timers like Nicola are working more hours than they should.
Ask you what particular tasks that you do that take up so much time?
Planning and preparing for lessons. I work in a one-form entry school, so I am responsible for teaching for planning for my year group. Although as I do work part-time, I plan the literacy from my class and my partner teacher plans the maths, and then we teach to each other's plans, which works really well because we've got a similar teaching style.
Report writing for teachers is a demanding task. Now that you're part-time, how does that look for you? How do you manage it?
This year I still had to put aside 2.5 weekends to write them. I mean, I could have done a lot of, copying and pasting and making them quite generic, but I didn't want to do that. Even though I shared that task with my partner teacher, it was a massive amount of work, which I did entirely in my own time.
Teachers have the right, to have a home life the same as everyone else, and also within our conditions of service to have work-life balance. I wondered if the school had actually looked collectively at what it can do to have a proper work-life balance policy in the school.
I'm not aware that there's a work-life balance policy, although there may be. We have recently carried out a wellbeing audit, which all the staff completed, and that the results of that were shared with the staff. So it is something that's out there and discussed amongst everyone.
Councillor Robert Latham wants to get Nicola thinking about how she could improve her situation.
If there was something around the workload demands that you could change, what would that be?
I think I would be able to have my PPA time at home. Would be something that would really make a difference. I have half a day every fortnight of PPA time, and that takes place in school, and you're constantly interrupted by people asking you questions, or you walk down the corridor and children start showing you some work, and then you're 20 minutes later you're back at your desk.
There is nothing that says you can't have PPA at home. It is up to the discretion of the management of the school, and it may well be that your other colleagues all feel the same. And perhaps, you could collectively approach the management and say, we would like this. Every teacher is entitled by law to a minimum of 10% of their teaching time to be spent on PPA. So it's up to you if you want to spend your PPA writing your reports or doing your planning. It's not something you can be directed about what you do in that time. And schools should have a policy about where teachers spend that time, because we are of course aware that there are many distractions in school, and it may be easier for teachers to be allowed to spend that time off-site. Whatever happens, it should be teacher direct.
So, in Nicola's situation, the panel suggests looking at which planning tasks take the longest and whether these might be shared, making sure PPA time is provided, and talking to management about taking this time out of school. Next up, Chairperson Julian Stanley has another workload issue for the panel.
Jason's been in contact by email. He's an experienced secondary English teacher, and about 6 months ago he was promoted to being a senior teacher, but he's finding the additional workload too much to handle. He admits that he didn't clearly check what additional duties he would have and what time would be allowed for these before accepting. Jason wants to approach the head about his workload, but is afraid that will affect his chances of future promotions. Robert, what advice would you have for Jason?
Sometimes people move away almost completely from classroom teaching. Other times they have to split between the two roles, so they still have to carry out the same duties they had as a classroom teacher, but they've got additional duties. You know, what is it about the new role that specifically he's finding really difficult? Is it an activity management issue? Is it a people management issue? We have to sometimes give up some relationships that we've had in the workplace, for example with colleagues or peer group, because we're now in the position of managing them.
Yes, so the
dynamic
changing
changes.
dynamic between the individuals.
And that often can produce, I think, in people quite a sense of pressure and stress, if you like.
Nina, turning to you.
What I would say immediately to Jason is that he needs to find out if he's getting proper leadership and management time, because teachers are entitled to have special time for that. And perhaps just to do some sounding out as to whether this is a problem for everyone. It's quite likely that other senior colleagues have also actually had this problem and have developed ways of working with it. And I would say perhaps he should, approach them first.
Simon recently quit his post as head of ICT in a secondary school. He feels that over a 3-year period, growing staffing and workload problems were not addressed by the school. He wants to know how to tackle similar problems in the future and how he can move on from this experience.
Welcome and thanks for coming today. Do you want to tell us more about your situation and how difficulties arose?
I'd worked with 2 NQTs for the first year. At the end of the first year, we had a situation where one of the NQTs left, and the following year we were down to 1 specialist ICT teacher and another teacher who unfortunately was ill for much of the year. We had to make do within somewhere in the region of 200 plus lessons covered by cover supervisors. Within a 12-month period, they just couldn't do the job of a specialist teacher. That put on a huge extra workload for me because I didn't have the help from members of the department that I had in previous years.
And what impact did that have on you?
There was now a backlog of work going into the following year. Yes. So coming into the 3rd year of my tenure as head of ICT, there was a lot for me to do.
And what were your leadership team saying at this point about the situation?
Well, I'd alerted the leadership that there was a lot of absence, a lot of cover supervision within the ICT department. I did go to the Board of Governors. I was looking to help from the my union as well. And I guess about 10 weeks into the term, we had a situation where the school suddenly decided they were going to bring in a supply teacher. Luckily, he was a specialist supply teacher, but it hadn't addressed all the issues. There were still issues with a backlog of work.
If you'd been in control of that situation, what would you have hoped for from the leadership?
They knew about the problems with the lack of teachers in the previous year. Something should have been done to start that new term.
What was the culmination of this? What were the consequences?
I'd gone to the doctor and there was talk of high blood pressure. I took a test and they said I was depressed, and I took time off work. I contacted my union again, and I was signed off for something like 6 weeks, which took me virtually to the end of the term.
And that led to a situation where you left?
Yep.
With Simon's situation laid out, what does union representative Nina Franklin make of his case?
I think you've been through an intolerable burden and have managed it for a very long time. And I think one of the things that comes across to me is the length of time that cover supervisors were being used, because they are there to supervise and not teach, and that puts an intolerable burden on you to provide the work for them to do. Mm-hmm. Teachers very often struggle on for months and months and months without asking for help, feeling guilty about perhaps bringing in the union or any others.
You mentioned that this had an impact on you at a personal level.
I knew I was under great anxiety, but I always thought that depression was something that is much more serious.
Oftentimes what people talk about is things like difficulties in concentrating, staying focused, affecting things like appetite, sleep patterns and things like that. Was that your experience?
The sleeping patterns were outrageous. You're trying to work things out, why, what's going on here, why is this happening? And you're there till 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. You cannot sleep. Contacting
an organisation like us sooner rather than later is probably a good idea, because it gives you the opportunity to talk things through with someone who is not part of this, what's going on, who doesn't have a particular interest in any outcome other than offering support, guidance, and opportunity for you or anyone in your position to talk through the issues and kind of figure out a way forward.
I've set my career back quite a few years by going back to main scale teaching.
Has that been for you about confidence building?
I feel that the time I took off work can't be explained away. I can't go into a head of ICT job and say, look, I was off work for this period of time, let me explain why. I don't feel as if I can do that.
Simon feels hindered by his period of absence. How will the panel be able to advise him in terms of his future career?
You're sort of pointing out here some of the issues around the stigma that is perhaps attached to this kind of situation.
I think there are issues around completing medical forms when one applies for a job, explaining periods of illness, whether they're for physical or mental health issues. I think people need to be honest with employers, because again, there may be problems that would arise later on in terms of the legal position of failing to declare something. So I think it's a very tricky area.
Nina, from a legal perspective, what would you say?
We would always advise that people are honest and that they talk about the steps they've actually taken to manage their condition with support, the high level of skills and the level of things they have to offer to the schools, so that schools are aware that that this has been managed and they do still have a great deal to offer.
So, in a situation like Simon's, the panel suggests contacting organisations like unions or the Teacher Support Network for advice. It may be worth visiting the doctor if you feel your health is suffering. When applying for jobs in the future, it's useful to be able to show how periods of difficulty have been overcome. The advice given in this programme is aimed at the individuals featured, so do consider seeking your own workload advice if you're faced with similar problems. For more information, contact the Teacher Support Network or visit the Teachers TV website.